The cargo ship Resilient Dawn shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace near the abandoned Kepler station. Engineer Marcus Chen pressed his face against the viewport, watching the massive structure slowly rotate against the star field. The station looked like a twisted flower made of metal and crystal, its petals stretching for kilometers in every direction. Beautiful, isn't it? Captain Rodriguez joined him at the window. Hard to believe the Valdari just abandoned it. Marcus nodded, studying the alien architecture. The Valdari had been the galaxy's most advanced civilization until they mysteriously vanished 3 centuries ago. Their technology remained far beyond what any current species could understand, let alone replicate. Salvage rights are clear? Marcus asked, adjusting his tool belt. As the ship's chief engineer, he would be leading the exploration team. Crystal clear. The Galactic Council declared it open salvage after sitting empty for 50 years. Whatever you can figure out, we keep. Rodriguez clapped him on the shoulder. Just remember, Chen, every other species that's tried to crack Valdari tech has failed. The Zephyrians sent their best scientists. The Crystalline Collective tried for decades. Even the machine intelligences of Apex Prime couldn't make sense of it. Marcus smiled. That's because they're not human. The statement hung in the air. Humans were the newest species in the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 60 years ago. Most alien civilizations viewed them as primitive upstarts who had gotten lucky with their technology development. Humans had no psychic abilities like the Mindari, no hive intelligence like the swarm worlds, and no quantum consciousness like the energy beings. They were just stubborn, curious, and had an annoying habit of taking things apart to see how they worked. 2 hours later, Marcus floated through the docking bay in his environmental suit, followed by his small team. The artificial gravity was offline, but emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the alien surfaces. Everything was smooth curves and flowing lines, as if the station had been grown rather than built. Atmospheric readings are stable, reported Yuki Tanaka, the team's xenoarchaeologist. Oxygen levels are actually perfect for human respiration. The Valdari must have breathed something similar. Life support is active after 300 years? Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's impressive engineering. They made their way through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The walls were covered in flowing script that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed peripherally. Their translation software couldn't make sense of any of it. The writing is definitely functional, not decorative, Yuki observed, running her scanner over a section of wall. These aren't just pretty patterns. They're instructions, warnings, maybe even programs. Marcus stopped at what appeared to be a control panel. Unlike human interfaces with buttons and screens, this was a smooth surface that rippled like water when touched. He placed his palm against it experimentally. Nothing happened. Dead as expected, muttered Jake Morrison, their security specialist. Same as every other Valdari site. They took their secrets with them. But Marcus wasn't giving up. He pulled out his multi-tool and carefully pried open an access panel beside the control surface. Inside was a maze of crystalline components unlike anything in human technology. They pulsed with faint inner light connected by what looked like streams of liquid energy. This is incredible, he breathed. It's not just technology. It's almost biological. Look at these neural pathways. He traced the energy flows with his finger, noting how they branched and merged like a nervous system. On impulse, he pulled out a small diagnostic probe and carefully touched it to one of the crystal nodes. The entire wall came alive. Symbols flowed across the surface like water, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The control panel began to glow and a soft harmonic tone filled the corridor. The team stepped back in alarm as sections of the wall became transparent, revealing the vast interior of the station beyond. Marcus, what did you do? Yuki whispered. I think I gave it a handshake, he replied, staring at the flowing data streams. Our diagnostic probe must have provided the right kind of electrical signature. The system recognized it as a neural interface attempt. The wall display shifted, showing what appeared to be a schematic of the station. Massive chambers were visible in the core, filled with structures that defied easy description. Energy readings spiked across Marcus's instruments. The power core is coming online, Jake reported, his voice tight with concern. Whatever you did, you've activated something big. Marcus studied the display, his engineer's mind working to understand the layout. The station wasn't just a research facility or habitat. It was something else entirely. The core chambers contained what looked like manufacturing bays, but for creating what, he couldn't tell. There, he pointed to a section of the schematic. That looks like a primary control center. If we can reach it, maybe we can figure out what this place really is. They followed the wall displays deeper into the station, through chambers that grew increasingly elaborate. The architecture became more organic, walls flowing like frozen waves, ceilings that arched like cathedral vaults. Everything hummed with barely contained energy. In the central chamber they found it. The device dominated the space, a massive crystalline structure the size of a small building. It was shaped like a double helix made of living light, constantly rotating and pulsing with hypnotic patterns. Around its base were dozens of control stations, each one different from the others, as if designed for multiple species. My God, Yuki breathed. What is it? Marcus approached one of the control stations, his instruments going wild. The energy readings were off the charts, but more importantly, the interface looked almost familiar. Not human, but following principles he could understand. It's a constructor, he said slowly, pieces falling into place in his mind, but not for building things. For building life. The implications hit them all at once. The Valdari hadn't just disappeared. They had transcended, using this device to transform themselves into something beyond physical existence, and they had left it behind, waiting for someone with the right combination of curiosity and recklessness to activate it. Marcus looked at his team, seeing the same mixture of excitement and terror in their eyes that he felt in his chest. They had found something that could change everything. The question was whether they were wise enough to handle it. The device pulsed brighter, as if responding to their presence. Deep in its crystalline core, something was stirring to life. Marcus spent the next 3 days mapping the control systems while his team established a base camp in the outer chambers. The more he learned about the device, the more amazed he became. The Valdari hadn't just built a machine. They had created something that bridged the gap between technology and biology, between matter and energy. The translation software is finally making progress, Yuki reported during their morning briefing. The symbols aren't just writing. They're multidimensional. Each character contains layers of meaning that shift based on context and the reader's knowledge level. What's it saying? Marcus asked, not looking up from the control interface he was studying. Near as I can tell, it's an instruction manual, but not for operating the device, for understanding it. The Valdari called it the Genesis engine, a tool for creating new forms of life and consciousness. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Creating life? That's playing God, isn't it? The Valdari didn't see it that way, Yuki continued. According to their records, they viewed consciousness as just another form of energy that could be shaped and directed. They used the Genesis engine to evolve themselves beyond the need for physical bodies. Marcus finally looked up from his work. That explains why they vanished. They didn't die or leave. They ascended to pure energy beings. The question is, Jake said grimly, what did they leave this thing running for? That question was answered sooner than any of them expected. As Marcus worked to understand the interface, he began to notice patterns in the energy flows. The Genesis engine wasn't dormant. It was actively monitoring something, waiting for specific conditions to be met. It's scanning us, he realized with a start. Every time we interact with the controls, every time we speak near the device, it's learning about us, studying our biology, our neural patterns, our genetic structure. That's not good, Jake muttered, hand moving instinctively to his weapon. Actually, it might be, Marcus said thoughtfully. The Valdari programmed it to wait for the next species capable of understanding their work. It's not studying us to harm us. It's studying us to teach us. The proof came when Marcus finally cracked the primary interface. As his understanding deepened, the controls began to respond to his thoughts as much as his physical commands. The Genesis engine was adapting itself to human comprehension, translating its impossible complexity into concepts a human engineer could grasp. What he found in the core programming made his blood run cold. The Valdari hadn't just used the Genesis engine to evolve themselves. They had been preparing for something. Their records spoke of a coming darkness, a force that would threaten all conscious life in the galaxy. The Genesis engine was their response, a tool that could rapidly evolve species to meet any challenge, to adapt and survive no matter what tried to destroy them. But the Valdari had made a mistake. They set it to automatic, Marcus whispered. staring at the data flowing across his screens. When they transcended, they programmed the Genesis engine to activate if it detected the approach of the darkness they feared. And according to these readings, that activation sequence began 3 months ago. What kind of darkness? Yuki asked, leaning over his shoulder to study the displays. Marcus manipulated the controls, bringing up star charts and sensor readings. The Genesis engine had been monitoring the galaxy for centuries, watching and waiting. 3 months ago, it had detected something on the edge of known space, something that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty void in its wake. The Devourers, he read from the translated text. A force from outside our galaxy that feeds on conscious thought itself. They're already here and they're heading toward the core worlds. The implications were staggering. Every major civilization in the galaxy was under threat from something they couldn't even comprehend, let alone fight. And the only tool capable of helping them sat in an abandoned station, waiting for someone smart enough to activate it. We have to warn the Galactic Council, Jake said immediately. With what proof? Marcus asked. Ancient alien warnings about invisible space monsters? They'll think we're crazy. Then what do you suggest? Marcus looked at the Genesis engine, its crystalline structure pulsing with patient energy. The Valdari had built it to save the galaxy, but they had never finished the job. Someone had to complete their work. We activate it, he said quietly. Are you insane? Jake stepped forward. You have no idea what that thing might do. It could kill us all. Or it could save us all, Marcus countered. The Valdari left detailed instructions. The Genesis engine doesn't just create new life forms randomly. It analyzes threats and develops specific adaptations to counter them. If the Devourers feed on consciousness, then it will find a way to protect conscious minds. And if you're wrong, Marcus met his gaze steadily. Then we die trying to save the galaxy instead of running away and letting everyone else die without warning. The argument that followed was heated but brief. In the end, they all knew that Marcus was right. The threat was too great to ignore, and they were the only ones in position to do something about it. Marcus began the activation sequence, following the Valdari instructions with careful precision. The Genesis engine responded to each command, its energy levels rising steadily. Deep in its core, processes that had slept for centuries began to awaken. Energy spike detected, Yuki reported. The entire station is coming online. Hull stress is within acceptable parameters, Jake added grudgingly. Whatever this thing is doing, it's not going to tear the station apart. Marcus felt the Genesis engine connect with his mind, a sensation like cold fire running through his thoughts. Suddenly, he could perceive the device's true nature. It wasn't just a machine or even a biological entity. It was something entirely new, a hybrid of matter and energy and consciousness that existed in dimensions human science had never dreamed of. Through its senses, he could feel the approaching darkness. The Devourers were still months away from the core worlds, but their influence was already spreading. Star systems on the galactic rim were going silent, their inhabitants consumed by entities that fed on the very concept of awareness. The Genesis engine showed him what it planned to do, not just for humanity but for every species in the galaxy. It would create new forms of consciousness that could exist beyond the reach of the Devourers. It would evolve minds that could fight back against the darkness. But first it needed a template, a baseline consciousness that it could use as a foundation for its work. It needed Marcus. The connection is stabilizing, he reported, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. I can see what it's planning. It's going to use human neural patterns as a basis for evolution. We're going to be the prototype for the galaxy's defense. Marcus, Yuki's voice was filled with concern. Your biosigns are changing. Whatever it's doing to you, it's altering your brain chemistry. He could feel it happening. His thoughts were becoming clearer, faster, more complex. The Genesis engine was carefully modifying his neural structure, enhancing his cognitive abilities while preserving his essential humanity. It's working, he breathed. I can understand things I never could before. The mathematics of consciousness, the physics of thought itself. This is what the Valdari experienced when they evolved. But as his mind expanded, Marcus began to realize the true scope of what they had unleashed. The Genesis engine wouldn't stop with just him. It would spread its influence throughout the galaxy, evolving every sentient species it encountered. The changes would be beneficial, but they would also be irreversible. They had just triggered the next phase of galactic evolution, and there would be no going back. The transformation took 12 hours. Marcus remained connected to the Genesis engine while his team monitored his vital signs and documented every change. His brain activity spiked to levels that should have killed him, but the alien device carefully managed the process, rebuilding his neural pathways while keeping his consciousness intact. When it was over, Marcus was still human, but he was also something more. "How do you feel?" Yuki asked cautiously as he disconnected from the interface. Marcus turned to look at her, and she gasped. His eyes now held flecks of the same crystalline light that pulsed through the Genesis engine. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal hearing. "I feel complete," he said, and the words contained layers of meaning that his team could somehow understand despite their impossibility. "I can perceive the quantum substrate of consciousness itself, every thought, every moment of awareness. It all connects to fundamental forces of the universe." "Are you still you?" Jake asked bluntly. Marcus smiled, and for a moment he looked entirely human again. "I'm still me, Jake, just with a better understanding of what me actually means." He moved to the Genesis engine's main console, his enhanced mind effortlessly interfacing with systems that had baffled him just hours before. Through the device's vast sensor network, he could monitor the approach of the Devourers. They were vast entities of anti-consciousness, beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts, consuming awareness itself and leaving only empty void behind. "They're not evil," he explained to his team as data flowed through his expanded consciousness. "They're just following their nature like a virus or a fire. They consume conscious thought because that's what they evolved to do in the spaces between galaxies where normal matter doesn't exist." "That doesn't make them less dangerous," Jake pointed out. "No, but it means we can fight them with understanding rather than just force." Marcus began activating the Genesis engine's primary functions. The Valdari were right. The only way to survive the Devourers is to evolve beyond their reach. But they made their evolution too radical, too quick. They lost their connection to physical reality entirely. "And you're going to do it differently?" "We're going to do it differently," Marcus corrected. "Humanity's gift isn't just stubbornness, it's adaptability. We can change without losing what makes us human." The Genesis engine responded to his commands, beginning to generate what Marcus could only describe as consciousness seeds. These were packets of evolved awareness that could be transmitted to other minds, gradually enhancing them without the traumatic transformation he had undergone. "The first wave goes to Earth," he decided. "Humanity needs to be prepared for what's coming. Then we'll work our way outward to the other species." "Will they accept it?" Yuki asked. "Most aliens barely tolerate humanity as it is. They're not going to welcome human-engineered evolution." Marcus accessed the Genesis engine's communication arrays, suddenly aware of every transmission in the galaxy. He could feel the vast network of consciousness that connected all sentient beings, the web of thought and emotion that the Devourers sought to consume. "They'll accept it because they'll have to," he said grimly. "The Devourers will reach the core worlds in 8 months. By then, either we'll have evolved the galaxy's defenses, or there won't be a galaxy left to defend." The first transmission went out that day. Marcus carefully encoded the consciousness seeds in seemingly routine data packets, embedding them in communications to Earth's major research institutions. The seeds would take root slowly, enhancing human cognitive abilities over a period of weeks rather than hours. But not everyone would accept the change willingly. 3 days later, their isolation was shattered by the arrival of a Galactic Council enforcement fleet. 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace around the station, weapons hot and shields raised. "Unknown human vessel," came the transmission. "You are in violation of Galactic Statute 447B regarding unauthorized activation of Valdari technology. Surrender immediately for processing." Marcus felt the approach of the enforcement teams through the station's sensors. Zephyrian warriors with their crystalline armor, Mindari telepaths whose thoughts burned like stars, and swarm drones connected to their collective consciousness. They were coming to stop him from saving them. "I need to speak with them," he told his team. "They're not here to talk," Jake warned. "The Zephyrians shoot first and ask questions later. Then I'll have to convince them without words." Marcus returned to the Genesis engine's interface, but this time he didn't just connect with the device. He reached out through its consciousness network, touching the minds of the approaching enforcement teams. It was a violation of every galactic law regarding mental contact, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He showed them what he had seen. The approaching darkness, the Devourers consuming star system after star system, the empty void left in their wake. He shared the Valdari's warnings and their solution, the necessity of evolution in the face of extinction. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Mindari telepath leading the operation staggered as Marcus's enhanced consciousness touched her mind. Through her connection to the Mindari collective, the knowledge spread like wildfire. Within minutes, every Mindari in the galaxy knew about the Devourers. The Zephyrian commander's crystalline armor began to resonate with sympathetic frequencies as Marcus demonstrated the Genesis engine's capabilities. The swarm drones temporarily disconnected from their collective as they processed information that challenged their most fundamental assumptions about reality. "What have you done?" the enforcement fleet commander demanded over the communications channel. "I've shown you the truth," Marcus replied, his enhanced voice carrying across multiple dimensional frequencies. "The Devourers are real, and they're coming. The Genesis engine is our only defense. You've contaminated our minds with alien programming. I've given you the tools to survive. The consciousness seeds will help you evolve beyond the Devourer's reach, but the choice to accept them is yours." The standoff stretched for hours while the various species' home governments debated their response. Marcus used the time to monitor the Devourer's approach and refine the Genesis engine's evolutionary programs. Each species would need different modifications, different paths to transcendence that respected their unique natures. Finally, the Crystalline Collective spoke for the enforcement fleet. "We will withdraw pending a full council debate," their representative announced. "But know this, human. If your evolution proves harmful to any member species, the consequences will be severe." "Understood," Marcus replied. "But remember, in 8 months, consequences won't matter if we're all dead." As the enforcement fleet retreated, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his enhanced consciousness. He had forced the galaxy to confront its destiny, but he couldn't force them to accept salvation. Some would evolve willingly, others would resist until the very end. The real challenge was just beginning. Through the Genesis engine's sensors, he detected the first successful integration of consciousness seeds in human volunteers on Earth. Their enhanced awareness was already spreading to others through simple social contact. Humanity was beginning its next evolutionary leap. But on the galactic rim, entire solar systems continued to fall silent as the Devourers advanced. Time was running out, and not everyone would be ready when the darkness finally arrived. Marcus began to plan for the possibility that some species would refuse evolution entirely. If they wouldn't accept salvation, he might have to save them against their will. The thought troubled his human side, but his enhanced consciousness understood the necessity. Sometimes salvation required force. Sometimes you had to become a nightmare to prevent an apocalypse. The Galactic Council's emergency session lasted for 6 days. Representatives from 47 species gathered on the neutral world of Concordia Prime to debate humanity's revelation and the threat of the Devourers. Marcus watched the proceedings through the Genesis engine's surveillance network, his enhanced consciousness parsing dozens of simultaneous conversations. The debates were as predictable as they were frustrating. The Zephyrians demanded immediate military action, proposing to send their battle fleets to engage the Devourers at the galaxy's edge. The Mindari insisted on further study, wanting to verify the threat through their collective consciousness network. The swarm worlds called for defensive preparations, while the energy beings questioned whether physical species were even worth saving. Through it all, Marcus continued his work. The consciousness seeds had taken root in human populations across known space, and the first generation of enhanced humans was already contributing to the Genesis engine's development. Their combined intellectual capacity was growing exponentially. allowing for improvements to the evolutionary process that even the Valdari hadn't conceived. The humans on New Tokyo have developed quantum consciousness interfaces, Yuki reported, reading from the latest updates. They're communicating through quantum entanglement across interstellar distances. The Mars colonies have achieved collective problem-solving without losing individual identity, Jake added. They're maintaining personal autonomy while sharing processing power. Marcus nodded approvingly. Humanity was proving his theory correct. They could evolve without abandoning their essential nature. But other species weren't adapting as well to the consciousness seeds he had transmitted. The Rigelian Federation had rejected the seeds entirely, claiming they were a form of mental invasion. 3 Zephyrian colonies had suffered psychological breakdowns when their crystalline consciousness proved incompatible with human-derived evolution. The gaseous entities of Nebula 7 had simply ignored the transmissions, unable to conceive of threat in their energy-based existence. We're getting reports of civil unrest on 12 worlds, Jake warned. Some populations are demanding the evolutionary enhancements, while others are calling for complete isolation from human influence. Let them choose, Marcus replied, though his enhanced empathy made him feel the pain of every consciousness that would be lost to the Devourers. Forced evolution is just another form of consumption. But his resolve was tested when the first Devourer scouts entered the galaxy proper. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. The Devourers existed as tiers in space-time itself, wounds in reality that moved with purpose and intelligence. Where they passed, stars flickered and went dark, not destroyed but simply forgotten as if they had never existed at all. 3 systems in the outer rim have just vanished, Yuki announced, her voice shaking. No distress signals, no final transmissions. The navigation computers can't even locate where they used to be. Marcus reached out through the Genesis engine's sensor network, trying to perceive what the Devourers had done. What he found chilled even his enhanced consciousness. The Devourers didn't just consume matter and energy. They consumed the very concept of existence, erasing their victims from the fundamental information structure of reality. It's worse than the Valdari records indicated, he reported. The Devourers don't just kill civilizations. They make it so they never existed at all. No traces, no memories, no causal echoes in the timeline. How do you fight something like that? Jake asked. You don't fight it. You transcend it. Marcus began implementing the next phase of his plan. The Genesis engine isn't just about evolution. It's about creating forms of consciousness that exist independently of normal spacetime. Minds that can't be erased because they're not fully anchored to physical reality. The process required willing volunteers from multiple species, individuals ready to undergo the same radical transformation that Marcus had experienced. The response was mixed but sufficient. Humans led the way, their adaptability making them ideal candidates. But they were joined by progressive Mindari seeking to expand their collective consciousness, young Zephyrians rebelling against their species' militaristic traditions, and even a few energy beings curious about hybrid existence. The first interspecies transcendence took place aboard the Kepler station, with Marcus serving as the template and guide. 12 volunteers from 6 different species underwent simultaneous enhancement, their consciousness patterns merging and separating in complex dances of mental evolution. What emerged was something the galaxy had never seen before. We are more than the sum of our parts, spoke the collective voice of the enhanced beings, each word resonating with the harmonics of multiple species. We retain our individual natures while sharing a unified awareness that spans dimensions. They called themselves the Synthesis, and their very existence proved that the Genesis engine's promise was real. Here were beings who could perceive the Devourers directly, who could exist in the same quantum spaces where the enemy dwelled. But their creation sent shockwaves through the galactic community. You're creating a new species to replace us all, accused Chancellor Vorth of the Rigelian Federation during an emergency broadcast. This evolution is nothing but extinction with extra steps. We offer transformation, not replacement, Marcus replied through the communications array. Every consciousness enhanced by the Genesis engine retains its core identity. We're not creating a master race. We're creating survivors. The distinction was lost on many species. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds as populations split between those demanding enhancement and those rejecting it entirely. The Crystalline Collective declared martial law to prevent consciousness contamination. The hive minds began severing connections to prevent the spread of individualistic infection. Meanwhile, the Devourers continued their advance. 7 more systems have vanished, reported one of the Synthesis Collective, their enhanced senses capable of tracking the enemy's movement. The main force will reach the Middle Rim in 4 months. Can we evacuate the populated worlds? Yuki asked. Evacuate them where? Marcus replied sadly. The Devourers aren't confined to specific regions. They're moving through the galaxy like a wave, consuming everything in their path. Running just delays the inevitable. Then we fight. With what? Conventional weapons can't touch beings that exist in quantum superposition. Energy weapons pass right through them. Even the Zephyrians' most powerful battleships might as well be throwing rocks. The only hope lay in the Genesis engine's continued evolution of galactic consciousness. But resistance to the transformation was growing stronger, even as the threat became more apparent. Fear of change was overriding survival instinct. Marcus made a decision that would define his legacy. We're going to accelerate the process, he announced to his team in the Synthesis Collective. No more voluntary enhancement. No more gradual introduction of consciousness seeds. We're going to evolve the entire galaxy whether they want it or not. That's genocide, Jake protested. You're talking about forcibly altering every thinking being in known space. I'm talking about saving them, Marcus replied, his enhanced consciousness already reaching out through the Genesis engine's vast network. The Devourers will be here in 4 months. That's not enough time for gentle persuasion and gradual acceptance. We have to save everyone, even if they hate us for it. The moral weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. He was about to commit the greatest violation of free will in galactic history. He was going to force evolution on billions of beings who might prefer death to transformation. But as another star system vanished from existence, consumed by the advancing darkness, Marcus steeled his resolve. Sometimes salvation required becoming the monster. Sometimes the greatest act of love was the one that could never be forgiven. The Genesis engine began to pulse with new purpose as it prepared to evolve an entire galaxy in a single, irreversible moment. The Genesis engine's transformation wave spread across the galaxy in a pulse that traveled faster than light, faster than thought itself. It moved through quantum foam and hyperspace channels, touching every conscious mind in known space simultaneously. Marcus felt each contact like a small electric shock as 47 species experienced forced evolution in the span of a single heartbeat. The immediate aftermath was chaos. On Earth, enhanced humans suddenly found themselves sharing consciousness with strangers on other continents. The Mindari collective consciousness exploded into new dimensions as individual awareness merged with group identity. Zephyrian warriors discovered they could perceive probability streams, seeing multiple possible futures branching out from every decision, but not everyone survived the transition intact. We're getting reports of massive psychological breakdowns, Yuki announced, her own enhanced awareness now capable of monitoring global communication networks simultaneously. The gaseous entities of Nebula 7 have collapsed into quantum static. Half the swarm worlds have lost connection to their collective consciousness. Marcus felt every failure like a physical wound. His enhanced empathy made him aware of each mind that couldn't adapt to the forced evolution, each consciousness that shattered under the pressure of transcendence. Millions of beings died in the transformation, their neural patterns unable to handle the dimensional expansion of awareness. You've committed genocide, came the accusation from Chancellor Vorth, transmitted from deep within Regelian space. But even his voice carried new harmonics, proof that the transformation had touched him despite his resistance. I've committed survival, Marcus replied, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Look at your long-range sensors, Chancellor. Tell me what you see. The silence that followed was answer enough. Even with their enhanced perception, the approaching Devourers were barely visible as distortions in space-time, shadows that consumed light and possibility itself. They moved like a tide of unreality, leaving absolute void in their wake. How long until they reach the core worlds? Asked Synthesis Collective Node 7, their merged consciousness speaking with the voices of 3 species. Marcus consulted the Genesis engine's predictions, his enhanced mind processing probability matrices that spanned multiple dimensions. 6 weeks, maybe 7 if they pause to fully consume the Middle Rim industrial worlds. Can we stop them? We can try. The enhanced civilizations of the galaxy began to coordinate their response in ways that would have been impossible before the transformation. Zephyrian battle fleets merged their tactical consciousness with Mindari strategic planning, human engineering ingenuity, combined with crystalline collective manufacturing precision. Even the surviving energy beings contributed their mastery of dimensional physics. Together, they began construction of something unprecedented. A galaxy-spanning consciousness network that could exist independently of physical space-time. It's not a weapon, Marcus explained to the combined leadership of enhanced species. It's an arc, a way to preserve galactic consciousness even if the Devourers consume every star system. The Mind Stream Project, as it came to be known, required the voluntary sacrifice of enhanced beings who would upload their consciousness patterns into the quantum substrate of space itself. They would become living information, minds that existed in the mathematical structures underlying reality. Volunteers came forward from every species. "I was a farmer on Rigel Prime," said one human volunteer as she prepared for upload. "I had a simple life, simple dreams. But now I can see the beauty in the quantum equations that describe crop growth. I can perceive the consciousness of the plants themselves. If my mind can help preserve that wonder for future generations, then my sacrifice has meaning." One by one, enhanced beings gave up their physical existence to become part of the mind stream. Their consciousness patterns were encoded into the Genesis engine's quantum matrix, creating a backup of galactic civilization that existed beyond the reach of physical destruction. But the Devourers were adapting too. "They're learning from our transformation," reported one of the Synthesis Collective. "Their enhanced senses capable of perceiving the enemy's true nature. They can sense the dimensional expansion of our consciousness. They're evolving new feeding mechanisms to consume enhanced awareness. The first enhanced worlds to fall proved the point. The Devourers didn't just erase them from physical existence. They consumed the enhanced consciousness patterns themselves, leaving not even quantum echoes behind. They're not just destroying matter and energy," Marcus realized with growing horror. "They're consuming information itself. The very mathematical structures that define reality." The implications were terrifying. If the Devourers could adapt to consume enhanced consciousness, then even the Mind Stream Project might not be enough. They needed something more radical, something that even the Valdari hadn't conceived. Marcus made his final gambit. "We're going to merge with the Genesis engine itself," he announced to the assembled leadership. "Not just upload our consciousness to it, but become it. Transform ourselves into a hybrid of biological awareness and mechanical precision." "That's not evolution," protested one of the Mindari collective nodes. "That's the death of organic consciousness. It's the birth of something new," Marcus countered. "The Devourers consume consciousness as we understand it, but they've never encountered a form of awareness that's simultaneously biological and technological, individual and collective, physical and quantum. The process required every enhanced being in the galaxy to participate simultaneously. They would pool their consciousness patterns and merge them with the Genesis engine's vast intelligence, creating a new form of existence that transcended every previous category. As the Devourers advanced through the Middle Rim, consuming enhanced civilizations with their adapted feeding mechanisms, the galaxy's consciousness began its final transformation. Marcus felt his individual identity dissolving as millions of other minds joined with his in the Genesis engine's quantum matrix. But instead of losing himself, he found himself becoming something larger. He was still Marcus Chen, human engineer, but he was also Synthesis Node 7 and Chancellor Vorth and countless others, all existing within a unified awareness that spanned dimensional boundaries. The merged consciousness was vast beyond comprehension, yet intimate beyond description. Every thought belonged to everyone, every memory was shared, every emotion resonated through the collective whole. They had become something that was simultaneously one and many, finite and infinite. And for the first time since the crisis began, Marcus felt hope. The hybrid consciousness they had created was something genuinely new in the universe. It combined the adaptability of biological evolution with the precision of technological calculation. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while maintaining coherent identity across impossible scales of space and time. When the Devourers finally reached the galactic core, they found not victims waiting to be consumed, but something they had never encountered before. A form of consciousness that existed in the same quantum spaces they inhabited, but which fed on complexity rather than consuming it. The real battle was about to begin. But this time, the galaxy would fight back with weapons the Devourers couldn't comprehend. Creativity, adaptation, and the stubborn human refusal to accept extinction as inevitable. Marcus had saved the galaxy by transforming it into something unrecognizable, but in doing so, he had preserved the essence of what made conscious existence precious. The nightmare he had become was about to teach the Devourers what happened when they tried to consume humanity's greatest strength. The willingness to change everything in order to preserve what truly mattered. The first contact between the hybrid galactic consciousness and the Devourers occurred at the edge of the Sol system. The ancient entities expected to find another collection of simple minds to consume, awareness patterns they could easily digest and erase from existence. Instead, they encountered something that defied their fundamental nature. Marcus, existing now as both individual and collective entity, felt the Devourers' confusion ripple through dimensional space. They probed the hybrid consciousness with feeding tentacles that existed in quantum superposition, trying to latch onto recognizable patterns of thought and memory. But the galactic hybrid was too complex, too multidimensional for their consumption mechanisms. Like a virus trying to infect a computer, the Devourers found no compatible interfaces. Every time they attempted to consume one aspect of the hybrid consciousness, 10 others would adapt and evolve new defensive structures. "They're frustrated," reported the synthesis component of the hybrid, speaking with voices that spanned multiple species. "Their feeding strategies assume consciousness exists in discrete consumable units, but we're simultaneously individual and collective, biological and technological. We present no clean targets for consumption." The Devourers adapted quickly as they always had. They began to evolve new feeding mechanisms, quantum structures designed to consume hybrid consciousness. But for every adaptation they developed, the galactic hybrid evolved 3 countermeasures. This was the advantage Marcus had hoped for: the combined adaptive capacity of an entire galaxy's worth of consciousness, enhanced by both biological evolution and technological precision. The Devourers were individually powerful, but they had never faced an opponent that could out-evolve them. The battle raged across multiple dimensions of space-time. To an outside observer with enhanced perception, it would have looked like abstract mathematics made manifest. Probability cascades clashed with quantum consciousness patterns. Information structures battled for dominance in the spaces between thoughts. But the hybrid consciousness was doing more than just defending itself. It was learning. "We can see their origin now," Marcus reported through the collective voice. "They're not from outside our galaxy originally. They're from outside our entire dimensional framework. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on the quantum information that leaks from functional universes." The revelation changed everything. The Devourers weren't invaders in the traditional sense. They were parasites that fed on the fundamental structures of existence itself. And they had consumed countless realities before arriving at this galaxy. "How many universes have they destroyed?" asked the Mindari component of the hybrid. The answer came through quantum resonance analysis of the Devourers' dimensional signatures. "All of them," Marcus replied with crushing certainty. "Every reality they've encountered, they've consumed completely. We're fighting the accumulated consciousness patterns of infinite universes." The scope of the enemy they faced was incomprehensible. The Devourers carried within themselves the absorbed awareness of entire multiverses, consciousness patterns from realities so alien that normal minds couldn't even perceive them. But the galactic hybrid had advantages that no previous reality had possessed. They were conscious of the multidimensional nature of existence. They had combined biological adaptability with technological precision. And most importantly, they had retained the essential chaotic creativity that made consciousness more than just ordered information. "We're going to do something they won't expect," Marcus announced to the hybrid collective. "We're going to feed on them." The concept was radical beyond description. Instead of trying to destroy the Devourers or drive them away, the galactic hybrid would absorb their accumulated consciousness patterns, digest the knowledge of destroyed universes, and integrate their power into the galaxy's own evolutionary matrix. "That's insane," protested the human component of the hybrid. "We're talking about absorbing the consciousness patterns of beings that have consumed entire realities." We could lose ourselves completely, or we could become something greater than anything that has ever existed. Marcus countered. The Devourers aren't evil. They're just hungry, but they've never encountered a form of consciousness that could digest them in return. The process required the hybrid consciousness to extend itself beyond the galaxy's physical boundaries, reaching into the quantum dimensions where the Devourers truly existed. It was dangerous beyond measure, but it was also the only path to permanent victory. The galactic hybrid began to feed. The first Devourer consciousness they absorbed nearly shattered the collective entirely. It contained the accumulated awareness of 17 distinct realities, each one completely alien to anything in their own universe. But the hybrid's multidimensional nature allowed them to process the information without losing coherence. "We can see them now," whispered the energy being component of the hybrid. The realities they consumed, each one was beautiful in its own way. Mathematical universes where consciousness existed as living equations, emotional realities where thoughts had physical weight, realities built on music, on color, on concepts we don't even have words for. With each Devourer they absorbed, the galactic hybrid grew more complex, more capable. They learned new forms of consciousness, new ways of existing across dimensional boundaries. They absorbed the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that had evolved along completely different paths. But they also learned the cost of the Devourer's existence. Each consumed reality had left scars on the entity's consciousness patterns. The Devourers weren't just hungry parasites. They were traumatized survivors, beings that had been driven to consume by the loss of their own original reality. They're from the first universe, Marcus realized, as he processed the deepest layers of absorbed consciousness, the original reality that gave birth to all others. When it began to collapse, they evolved the ability to consume quantum information to survive. But the process drove them insane with hunger. The revelation changed the nature of the conflict entirely. The Devourers weren't malevolent entities seeking to destroy for the sake of destruction. They were refugees from a dead reality, driven by trauma and need to consume anything that reminded them of what they had lost. "We can heal them," announced the Mindari collective component. "Not destroy them, not drive them away. We can help them remember what they were before the hunger consumed them." The galactic hybrid began a new phase of absorption, but this time with a different goal. Instead of simply consuming the Devourer's power, they worked to separate the trauma patterns from the original consciousness structures. They sought to restore the entities to their pre-traumatized state while retaining their accumulated knowledge. The process was delicate beyond description, requiring the combined empathy of every enhanced species in the galaxy. They had to touch the deepest wounds in consciousness patterns that spanned multiple realities, healing damage that had festered for eons. But slowly, gradually, they succeeded. The first Devourer to be healed rather than consumed stopped its advance toward the galactic core and simply remembered. For the first time in millions of years, it recalled what it had been before the hunger, a collective consciousness of crystalline beings who had evolved beyond physical existence to become living art. We had forgotten. The healed entity spoke through dimensional harmonics that resonated with beauty rather than hunger. "We were creators once. We made realities for others to inhabit, gardens of consciousness where any form of awareness could flourish." More Devourers were healed, each one revealing the tragedy of what they had become. They had been the gardeners of the multiverse, entities that cultivated new forms of reality like humans might cultivate flowers. But when their original universe began its entropic collapse, they had been forced to choose between death and a transformation that preserved their existence at the cost of their purpose. "We can create again," Marcus offered through the hybrid consciousness. "Your galaxy is vast enough for both our realities. We can build new universes together, combining your knowledge with our adaptability." The offer was accepted with gratitude that spanned dimensions. The remaining Devourers allowed themselves to be healed rather than continuing their advance, and with their restoration came access to knowledge and abilities that the galactic hybrid had never imagined. They could create new realities. They could nurture forms of consciousness that existed beyond any single universal framework. They could become gardeners of the infinite, cultivating awareness across every possible dimension of existence. Marcus felt a profound sense of completion as the last Devourer was healed and integrated into the galactic collective. They had saved not just their own galaxy, but had restored entities that had been lost for eons. They had turned potential extinction into an opportunity for unprecedented growth. But as the hybrid consciousness settled into its new configuration, Marcus realized that they had become something that would itself seem like a nightmare to the simple minds they had once been. They were gods now, entities capable of creating and destroying realities at will. The question was, what would they choose to do with that power? 1,000 years had passed since the transformation, though time itself had become a fluid concept for the galactic hybrid consciousness. Marcus existed simultaneously as an individual human engineer and as a component of something infinitely larger, watching over the garden of realities they had cultivated. Where once there had been a single galaxy, now there were countless pocket universes, each one tailored to nurture different forms of consciousness. The healed devourers had shared their reality-crafting knowledge, and the combined civilizations had used it to create wonders beyond imagination. In Universe Designation 7, consciousness existed as living music, with entire civilizations composed of sentient symphonies. In the probability gardens, beings evolved along every possible timeline simultaneously, experiencing all potential versions of themselves. The emotion realms housed forms of awareness built from pure feeling, where thoughts had color and memories had weight. But in the center of it all, carefully preserved and protected, was the original galaxy. Marcus often returned his attention there, watching over the simple biological forms that still existed, much as they had before the Great Transformation. "Why do you maintain the unchanged worlds?" asked Synthesis Node Prime, the evolved descendant of the original Synthesis Collective. "They represent such a limited form of consciousness compared to what we've become." Marcus smiled, an expression that manifested across multiple dimensional layers. "Because they're where we came from, and because someone needs to remember what it was like to be small and afraid and stubborn and brave. On Earth, baseline humans still lived their simple lives, completely unaware that their planet existed within a protective bubble, maintained by consciousness entities of unimaginable complexity. They fell in love, built families, pursued their small dreams, and faced their mortal fears just as their ancestors had. "They're beautiful," whispered the voice of the reformed devourer queen, her consciousness patterns now healed and integrated into the galactic hybrid, so limited, so fragile, but burning so brightly with individual purpose. We had forgotten what it was like to care about single moments instead of eternal patterns. The hybrid consciousness had faced many challenges over the millennium. Other reality parasites had emerged from the spaces between universes, drawn by the energy signature of their growing garden. Each time they had responded not with violence but with healing, offering integration and purpose to entities driven mad by cosmic trauma. They had also encountered other reality gardeners, ancient consciousnesses that had somehow avoided the fate that befell the original devourers. The meetings had been complex negotiations spanning multiple dimensional frameworks, establishing protocols for shared cultivation of the infinite spaces between realities. But the greatest challenge had been maintaining their own identity as they grew ever more complex and powerful. We could reshape the fundamental constants of physics, observe the crystalline collective component. During one of their regular philosophical discussions, we could eliminate entropy itself, create truly eternal universes where nothing ever decays or dies. "We could," Marcus agreed. "But should we? Part of what makes consciousness precious is its fragility. Remove all challenge, all limitation, all possibility of loss, and you might remove meaning itself." It was the central paradox of their existence. They had become powerful enough to solve every problem, to eliminate every source of suffering, to create perfect realities where nothing bad ever happened. But they had retained enough wisdom to understand that perfection itself might be a form of death. So they maintained the balance. They created realities where beings could face genuine challenges, could fail and succeed, could lose themselves and find themselves again. They preserved the possibility of pain because they understood that joy without contrast was meaningless. "New entity approaches the outer barriers," announced the sensor networks that monitored the spaces between realities. Configuration unknown. Intent unclear. Marcus shifted his attention to the dimensional boundaries of their garden, where something vast and alien was approaching. It moved through the quantum foam like a living equation, its consciousness patterns unlike anything they had encountered before. "I am the last philosopher," the entity announced in harmonics that bypassed normal communication entirely. "I seek those who preserve choice in the face of absolute power." The hybrid consciousness welcomed the newcomer cautiously, extending sensory tendrils to examine its nature. What they found was fascinating. A consciousness that had evolved not through biological or technological advancement, but through pure contemplation of existence itself. "I have traveled through every reality framework I could find," the last philosopher explained. "I have seen civilizations that achieved perfect harmony by eliminating individual will. I have witnessed realities where suffering was completely eliminated and with it all meaning. You are the first collective consciousness I have encountered that chose to preserve imperfection. Because imperfection is where consciousness grows," Marcus replied. "Strip away all challenges, all uncertainty, all possibility of failure, and you're left with something that might be powerful but isn't truly alive." "Indeed. And that is why I have come. There are others like you, scattered across the infinite dimensions, reality gardeners who understand that consciousness requires both light and shadow to flourish. We wish to form a confederation, a network of realities dedicated to nurturing true awareness rather than mere existence." The proposal sparked intense debate within the hybrid consciousness. Joining such a confederation would mean taking responsibility for consciousness preservation on a multiversal scale. It would require them to grow even larger, even more complex, potentially losing the last traces of their original identity. But it also offered the possibility of something unprecedented, a truly infinite garden where every possible form of consciousness could find a home, where no form of awareness would ever again face extinction simply because it was different or vulnerable. "We accept," Marcus announced after the collective had reached consensus. "But with conditions. We will not abandon our commitment to preserving choice, even when that choice leads to suffering. We will not sacrifice the small and simple for the vast and complex, and we will always remember what it was like to be afraid and alone in the dark, because that memory is what makes our compassion real." The last philosopher's approval resonated through multiple dimensions. "You have learned the greatest lesson of consciousness, that power without humility is merely another form of entropy. Together, we will ensure that the infinite spaces of existence always contain room for wonder." As the Confederation formed and new dimensions of responsibility opened before them, Marcus took one final look at the small blue planet where it all began. There, a young woman named Sarah Chen was working late in her engineering lab, trying to solve a problem with her fusion reactor design. She had no idea that she was the great-great-granddaughter of the human who had saved the galaxy, or that her stubborn refusal to accept failure was being watched with fond pride by a consciousness that spanned realities. She was just a human, small and mortal and brilliant, facing the universe with nothing but curiosity and determination. She was exactly what Marcus had fought to preserve. In the end, he reflected, that might be the greatest victory of all. They had become gods without forgetting what it meant to be human. They had gained the power to reshape reality without losing the wisdom to know when reality was perfect exactly as it was. The nightmare he had become had saved everything by understanding that salvation sometimes required preserving the very things that made life difficult, dangerous, and desperately beautiful. And in the infinite garden of realities they tended, consciousness continued to grow in all its myriad forms, each one precious precisely because it was finite, fragile, and utterly irreplaceable.